Hey out there, want to go for a ride? It's easy.
Polaroid just made United's Friendly Skies $100 friendlier.
And that's friendly.
You buy $50 or $100 worth of our cameras or film before New Year's, and United will take the same amount off most of their U.S. round trips next year.
Even Hawaii.
We'll send you your discount coupons, so buy your camera and film and you're on your way.
And I'll be the captain.
You can't fly.
I can try.
Polaroid, or the Polaroid Corporation if you want to be fancy about it, was an American company that, well, even if you're not overly familiar with them as a corporate entity, you're probably familiar with their product. The word Polaroid is synonymous with instant film cameras. You ever used one of those cameras that instantly prints the picture in like an actual photo, like right there on the spot? No need to take it anywhere to get it developed or anything like that? Yeah, that's their whole thing, or it was for a long time. And yeah, they actually had great success over the years, competing in the market alongside the very, very dominant Kodak. But Polaroid isn't around anymore. Well, sorry, scratch that. The name is, but the original company's long gone. And this is where we get to the part of, why? Darkness, please! Tell us what they did wrong! And it was, it was a lot, actually. They really did screw this up. I guess it wasn't completely their fault, because I think it's a little bit unfair to judge them via retrospect, given what wound up happening. They couldn't have predicted the level of shift the market would take, but they didn't do themselves any favors either. Their story is similar to Kodak's, but not quite the same. So, let's get into it. The origins of the Polaroid company go all the way back to one of their founders, in fact their major founder, Edwin Herbert Land, who was less a businessman and more scientist and inventor. Land was a genius. Legitimately. This guy was good at what he did, which was making stuff. Even from a young age, he was very inquisitive. He was born to Jewish parents in Bridgeport, Connecticut. His mother was named Maddie, and his father, Harry. In his youth, Land had a habit of just kind of taking things apart, because, you know, kids do that sometimes, but he really liked doing it, just to see how things work. And he had a habit of blowing all the fuses in the house. with his antics. The kid was out of control, but he had a brilliant mind, and he was really trying to figure out how everything worked. He would wind up getting into Harvard to study physics, specifically optics. But he never graduated from Harvard. He left after his freshman year because, like with some geniuses, not all, but some, Land didn't like school. Just not a school study guy. Not the kind of thing he liked doing. He wanted to make stuff and the books were boring. He just wanted to do more experiments. And indeed, his experiments would bear fruit after he moved to New York City. He would eventually invent something called Polaroid film. Though getting that far was actually quite difficult for him, because since he was no longer associated with any educational institution, he didn't have access to the proper tools to do something this revolutionary. He couldn't just do this kind of thing in his closet. Well, I mean, I guess he could, but it would be a lot more difficult. So, he had a habit of sneaking into the laboratory at Columbia University late at night to use their equipment. Ah, excellent, excellent. The secret ingredient, you see, is crime, children. Also, don't actually do that. You'll probably just get arrested. But in Land's case, it kind of worked out. In terms of exactly what this invention is, well, Polaroid is a type of synthetic plastic sheet, which can be used as a polarizer or polarizing filter for light. Basically, it only lets light waves of a very specific polarization pass through it, while blocking light waves of other polarizations. It wasn't the first time this sort of thing had been done, but the thing about Land's creation was that it was cheap. It was relatively easy to create in the first place and used relatively inexpensive materials, meaning that it was marketable. You could produce a lot of it for rather little money and sell it for a pretty decent amount of money in the right context, because obviously this sort of thing requires some kind of product to go along with it. You couldn't just sell the raw stuff. I mean, I guess you could, but someone would have to be using it for something. But this is Land, and he's smart, so eventually he would figure out exactly what this stuff could be used for. His original business outing began in 1932. Because even though he never graduated from Harvard, he did make friends at Harvard, including one of the physics professors, George Wheelwright III. Land and Wheelwright pooled their resources to establish Land Wheelwright Laboratories in an attempt to commercialize the polarizing tech that Land had created. Wheelwright basically brought the money to this equation because Land was pretty poor, but Wheelwright came from a family that was very well off, and he knew from his experience with Land already that the dude was really friggin' smart and liked what he saw. However, pictures were not actually the first things that he wound up coming up with. That invention would come later. What he wound up creating were sunglasses. Polarized sunglasses. Which, of course, are, well, sunglasses. I mean, you know what sunglasses are. At least I hope you do. But they were particularly good sunglasses because of the polarization effect that was associated with Land's invention. As it turns out, exploiting polarization can be incorporated into a lot of different products that you and I probably didn't even think of. Things like photographic filters, for example, were incorporated into the business model, and eventually he would obtain funding from a series of Wall Street investors. The company would officially be renamed to the Polaroid Corporation in 1937. Land's patents found their way into many different things, glasses that were utilized in stereoscopic movies, and they were also used to tint windows. Yeah, it's simple, but I mean, it was there too. And it's probably worth mentioning that it still exists in the modern day, because, liquid crystal display, LCD, yeah, the polarization stuff is actually 100% completely mandatory to make LCDs work the way they do. So, yeah, Land had his hand in a lot of stuff, and his influence still stands. During World War II, though, the company would be tasked with helping the military, because this is the friggin' World War, people! The second, number 2, and we gotta make some stuff to help the situation, alright? Everyone's having a bad time. Land would put his mind to work and develop things like dark adaptation goggles, target finders, something called the vectograph, which was co-invented by a Czech refugee named Joseph Mahler. The vectograph was pretty interesting, as it was a stereoscopic print, or transparency, that could be viewed using polarized 3D glasses. The idea is that the vectograph could be utilized to help reveal camouflaged enemy positions with aerial photography. It made things a lot more detailed, so it was pretty critical to the war effort. Oh, yeah, he also had a hand in the first passively guided smart bombs. Yay! Because of course he did. This is war, people. There's gonna be bombs. It's just a thing that happens. And Land's contributions shouldn't be understated once again. But you're probably wondering, okay, this is all well and good, Darkness, but what is the deal with the instant film cameras? You said that's what this was about. This is Polaroid. That's what we know Polaroid for, because we haven't done any reading. You did the reading. You did the research. You're supposed to tell us everything you know. And I say to you, that's fair. So okay. It was actually while the war was still ongoing that Land would get his idea to create what we generally associate his company with. See, at the time he was on vacation in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with his eldest daughter named Jennifer, just 3 years old. He would, of course, snap a picture of her because that's what you do on vacations, but she, being 3, asked her dad why she couldn't see the picture, because she wanted to see what she looked like. Of course, this was impossible. The film had to be developed. It was still the 40s. But that put the idea into Land's head that, well, why can't we just develop the picture immediately? Isn't that possible? Land proceeded to set his mind to creating this new invention. But it did take some time. This was uncharted territory. I mean, creating a camera that could print a picture on the spot as you take it, I mean, that was a tall order. It just hadn't been done before. But Land pulled it off. On February 21st, 1947, he successfully demonstrated what he called the Land camera. Technically, the Land camera Model 95. Presumably because it took 94 failures to get that far. Hey, listen, technology is hard. You're gonna have a lot of failures before you get to the final result. But the thing was, it worked. The way it worked was that it utilized diffusion transfer to move the dyes from the negative to the positive via a reagent. The exposure happened inside the camera, and it was lined up with the positive sheet and squeezed directly through a set of rollers, which spread the reagent between the two layers. This sandwiched the two basically together, and the negative would develop relatively quickly. The unexposed silver halide grains were solubilized by the reagent and then transferred by diffusion from the negative to the positive. After about a minute, the back of the camera could be opened, and you just peeled the negative away, which revealed the actual picture. Most of you probably didn't understand a word I just freaking said, but that's how it worked, and if you know anything about cameras, this was genius. It was elegant and simple for the time, though it wasn't necessarily ready for commercial use. They wouldn't be available until 1948, and they only actually manufactured 60 at first, because they didn't think there was going to be a massive amount of interest. They were wrong. There were 57 sent to the Jordan Marsh department store in Boston. And all of them sold out the first day. So they were like, oh, okay, we're gonna have to make a lot more of those. And they did. Naturally, the company proceeded to develop the technology further into forms that were even easier to use, and the film business became their bread and butter for several decades. Film, on its own, for one thing, is very easy to mark up. It's very cheap to make, but also easy to sell at a very good profit, 62% in Polaroid's case. But that would come back to bite them. And if you remember Kodak, yeah, it would be the same problem. But we haven't gotten there yet. With the advent of the instant film cameras, the company grew quite a bit, especially for hobbyists. It was just easier for the regular person to take a Polaroid camera on a holiday and have their prints ready immediately. True, Kodak's film was generally a lot nicer. The instant prints did come with a lot of compromises, especially back then, but having them instantly was the main focus here, and that's exactly what Polaroid offered. Kodak was more if you wanted to be a bit more fancy, or if you were a professional. Additionally, if you wanted larger sizes, naturally Polaroid's cameras could only print off pictures that were about as big as the camera, and not any larger. So, yeah, but for a part of the market, Polaroid was a pretty big deal, and people gave them their money for their products. For a time, they were kind of viewed in the same light as, well, Apple. They were kind of the Apple to Kodak's Microsoft, if you get my meaning. Like, yeah, Kodak was way bigger than them, and most people had the Kodak products, but Polaroid off to the side with this weird, kooky, nonsense innovation and all this cool stuff. I mean, both kind of went well together and encompassed the same market and couldn't actually outcompete the other one because they offered different things. Land himself would continue contributing his mind to other such projects, even helping work on the U-2 spy plane's optics, which, yeah, really. And despite never officially graduating, Harvard University in 1957 gave Land an honorary doctorate because, I mean, yeah, that's fair. But remember what I said. Land wasn't really much of a businessman. Yeah, he was making a lot of money. He was very successful. But only because, so far, he had managed to invent things that could be marketable. This would come back to bite him because when you're a smart guy, you get ahead of yourself and you want to make something, and you want to do it cool, and you think it's going to be great and wonderful and awesome. And sometimes that works out great, as it has for Land. So far. This would not last. The instant cameras were amazing, and people loved them, but Land had an even bigger idea in mind. Polavision. Polavision did not supply instant photos. It supplied instant movies. Really? How could this possibly fail? That sounds awesome. And, okay. On paper, yeah, it probably should have been. But it was the company's first major failure. It was launched in 1977, though by that point, Land had already been working on the idea for over a decade, and naturally, millions had been invested in this thing. The Polavision Land camera reproduced color by the additive method. It utilizes a black and white emulsion on a film base that's covered with a very narrow, like microscopic level narrow, of red, green, and blue filter stripes. It couldn't actually be developed in the camera, necessarily. That was asking quite a lot, but it came with a Polavision processing unit, and would be ready for viewing in just a few minutes. It utilized cartridges, which they called phototape cassettes. And regardless of all the science behind it and how it actually worked, it did work. You could use a Polavision Land camera and film something, and get a movie out of it in just a few minutes. That sounds awesome, especially given it was launched in 1977. Why didn't this take off? Well, frankly, because it was awful. Okay, I shouldn't say that. It wasn't awful in the sense that it was a pretty cool device. Like, it did do what it said it was going to do. The problem was a lot of the way they went about it. For one thing, yeah, it did produce instant movies, and that's neat and all, but by instant movies, I mean 3 minutes of film. And no more. You literally couldn't get a longer runtime than 3 minutes. What the heck are you gonna film in 3 minutes? This was the days before viral videos and friggin' TikToks, people. Short form didn't exist back then. And trust me, that was a big no-go for a lot of people. Especially since in the late 70s, other formats were coming out that, while were technically more expensive, offered longer runtimes, higher quality, and also weren't proprietary. See, that was the other problem with the Polavision. That phototape cassette I mentioned, yeah, it couldn't actually be viewed at all without being placed into the Polavision tabletop viewer. The only way to view it without one of those players is to literally destroy the cassette and either project the film with a super 8mm projector or by transferring it to video with a telecine system. Either way is also known as what? I shouldn't have to break the thing to be able to view it, guys. Alright, it's ridiculous. That, and it probably wouldn't be worth viewing anyway. For one thing, 3 minutes. Seriously, 3 minutes? I'm still on about that. But also, the actual quality of the film wasn't really that good. The instant photos that Polaroid was delivering by 1977 looked alright. Casual photographers were totally fine with the results you'd get from a Polaroid. But the movie part of things was not giving great results overall. Because of the compromises needed to actually make this work, the final product was pretty, dull, and sometimes rather dark. While some artists actually liked it due to the unique effect you'd get off of it, regular people that weren't doing some artistic project didn't really have much of use for this thing. They had some small success in terms of industrial testing, only because if you had to view a particularly dangerous test that had to be done, like, behind a brick wall to avoid killing anybody, you could film it with a Polavision and then get the results pretty much instantaneously to see exactly what happened. But outside of that specific thing, no one really wanted it. It also couldn't be erased, nor could it be overwritten. Once you filmed on one of those cartridges, that was it. It was done. And there was no sound. Of course there wasn't. It was a complete and total flop, with basically all the manufactured equipment involved in this project being sold off in 1979 at a loss of $68.5 million. And it was so bad that Land himself was forced to resign from the chief executive position in 1980. He would wind up leaving the company just 2 years later. Despite the unmitigated disaster of Polavision, Polaroid was still able to carry forward for many years. It wasn't enough to completely topple them. Yeah, it was bad, but they could recover, and they did, sort of, at least for a while. But very quickly, it was found that without Land, they started doing things that Polaroid had never been known for, which, experimenting is great and all, but a lot of these decisions wound up being just really bad. For one thing, they weren't even really experimenting. With Land gone, they kind of stopped innovating, and were almost afraid to take chances. And when they did take chances, it was done in the most catastrophically stupid ways imaginable that it only made their situations worse. They went through a series of management changes, which is always good. That's always great. Whenever you hear company management changes, it's like, oh boy, that's great. And in 1984, they decided it was a really great decision to get into the electronic video market with their own line of Polaroid videotapes. And honestly, on paper, that's probably fine. You're expanding the market. Tapes are based off of film, which you make, so okay, that's fine. But, the way they went about this was not good. See, they wound up making a whole bunch of changes to their overall corporate structure that meant they fired thousands of workers and closed a whole bunch of their own factories in order to focus on the videotapes, and they never really had like a major component of the market for their tapes. I mean, their tapes were fine, but you didn't need to fire everybody to do any of that, and you did, and they really were just afraid of any kind of new technology. The Polavision had taught them the wrong lesson, because yes, it was a massive flop. That is not up for debate. But that doesn't mean you don't innovate anymore. In fact, you should keep trying to do that. Just make something better. Something that people actually want to buy. And the one thing they were really deathly afraid of, just like scared witless of, was anything to do with electronics. They really hated just the word electric. Meaning that despite the fact that their R&D department had been dabbling with digital cameras since at least the mid-80s, they, in a similar manner to Kodak, didn't heavily invest in restructuring themselves to the market completely shifting into digital cameras. Well, it is true, Kodak's fault wasn't exactly because they didn't make digital cameras, because they did make digital cameras. It was that they were over-reliant on film sales. Polaroid was pretty much the exact same way. They always assumed that people still want photos they can hold in their hands. And no, not generally. I mean, yeah, sometimes you do, but those are kind of special situations. Not every photo was worth printing. And that was kind of Polaroid's problem. More affordable digital cameras would soon rise to the occasion and allow people to take hundreds of pictures at a time without having to change out any kind of film or anything of that nature. And then if you wanted to print them, you could just do that later. But the novelty of a Polaroid had worn off by that point, and people didn't necessarily want to print every single shot they took. In their defense, they were pretty early to the digital camera market. Their PDC 2000 model came out in 1996, but the problem was that they didn't invest heavily in the technology. They thought it was a novelty, a fad that would eventually wear off. No, that is not what happened. And over time, their film sales tanked quite quickly, and they were never as large as Kodak, so they didn't have the extra funds just kicking around to support themselves while they made any attempt to reorient. When money stopped coming in from the film, the cameras weren't enough to support them. Their last-ditch effort to try to stay afloat was to start working on scanners, like the Polaroid Sprint Scan 4000. It was the first scanner with a 4000 DPI CCD, which is pretty impressive. That was in 1999. Polaroid Print Scan 120 would come out in 2000, but these weren't really that well received. Competition in the scanner sector was ramping up. Polaroid's offerings received pretty mixed reviews, and much like with Kodak, Japanese companies were coming into the fold when it came to the American market, and were basically kicking the crap out of both Polaroid and Kodak because they were offering better products at less cost. Right before Polaroid declared bankruptcy, they sold off their historic headquarters for just $10 million and then filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protections on October 11th, 2001. The proceedings surrounding this took about 10 months, but to shorten this explanation, basically, everything got sold off. Pretty much. They didn't really restructure in any way. I mean, they kind of did, but the vast majority of their products and everything associated with them was sold to Bank One's One Equity Partners, or OEP. OEP Imaging Corporation would then change their name to Polaroid Holding Company, or PHC. But the bankruptcy proceedings and the resolution was actually met with a lot of criticism, mostly because it kind of screwed over everyone but the top executives of the company, which is hilarious, because they're the ones who had gotten the company into this position in the first place. The executives received large bonuses, but stockholders and the employees were left with basically nothing. Which is kind of rare. Not the screwing over employees part, that part's common, but you screwed over the stockholders too? Really? Money men don't like that. Are you kidding me? That's really bold. The plan basically gave the top 45 executives bonuses just for staying at their jobs, and the employees were then restricted from selling their stock before they left. So, restricted from selling the worthless stock before leaving, and then waiting for it to literally be worth nothing. That's great. Thank you for that. Technically speaking, the original Polaroid company continued to exist for a while, but only as a shell corporation. By 2006, they had no associated business model or any employees for that matter. But the brand of Polaroid, of course, continues to live on, even to this day. You may have seen certain products with the Polaroid name on them. Understand that this is just the brand. Not at all the original company. Not at all them making a comeback or something. This is just for brand recognition. The licenses were sold all over the place and have been placed on anything from televisions to DVD players to even Android smartphones. Polaroid Holding Company was acquired by Petters Group Worldwide in 2005. The remaining manufacturing operations would wind up being sold off to Flextronics, which outsourced basically everything to China, meaning any remaining employees that were still manufacturing stuff here were now out of a job. Polaroid cameras ceased being manufactured in 2007, and Polaroid film stopped being made in 2009. Though, in 2008, PHC would file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protections. Yep. The remnants of Polaroid also filed for bankruptcy, but this was related to criminal investigation into that parent company, Petters Group Worldwide, and their founder, Tom Petters. That element is kind of its own story, and there's a lot to unpack here, but long story short, Tom Petters was accused and eventually found guilty of running a Ponzi scheme that included, $2 billion of investment fraud. They had been running this scheme by creating phony purchase orders from places like Sam's Club and BJ's that created the appearance of huge merchandise sales without actually making any sales at all. Oh yeah, and the general counsel for the Petters Group, David Baer, would eventually be found guilty of drug charges. So that was great too. Baer received 3 years probation on that, but Petters got the book thrown at him for the Ponzi scheme. He was sentenced to 50 years in federal prison. In terms of how this affected the remnants of Polaroid, well, Patriarch Partners would win an auction for those assets, or at least they should have, but a lot of the other companies that also bid felt that it was unfair somehow, and Patriarch wound up just saying the heck with it and walking away from the deal. Eventually, Polaroid would be sold to a joint venture of Hilco Consumer Capital LP of Toronto and Gordon Brothers Brands LLC of Boston. They started utilizing the brand for things like digital still cameras, digital video cameras, digital photo frames, and Pogo-branded mobile products. They did okay for a while, and in 2010 they even appointed Lady Gaga as their creative director. I mean, she is pretty creative, but by 2014 that was no longer a thing. In 2017, however, things got real freaking interesting. The holding corporation for Polaroid, PLR IP Holdings LLC, was sold off to a Polish investor named Władysław Slava Smolokowski. goodness, I hope I'm saying that right. Smolokowski, alright, he was the largest shareholder in what was known as the Impossible Project, which is a Dutch photography and consumer electronics company founded specifically to manufacture the discontinued film that Polaroid was using. So, hobbyists and people that loved Polaroids, because they did have a bit of a cult following, could still get film that could be used in those cameras. The Impossible Project had actually been founded all the way back in 2008, and it seemed some success on the smaller scale, but due to Smolakowski's involvement and him acquiring those assets, it meant that they were now technically officially Polaroid, because they had the brand, meaning that they no longer called themselves the Impossible Project. They rebranded as Polaroid Originals. In March of 2019, the new Polaroid.com website listed instant cameras and supplies made by them, and in 2020, they would rebrand as simply just Polaroid. They're still in business as of the making of this video. So in a weird roundabout way, Polaroid does still exist, doing what they always did, except not really. The original Polaroid is gone, but their assets eventually found their way to the hands of people that frankly love Polaroid, and could then, therefore, call themselves Polaroid. So I guess thank you to both Poland and the Netherlands. How about that? Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.